For decades, if you wanted to be the world heavyweight champion, the road to the top ran through one city. And no, it wasn't New York, it wasn't Charlotte, it was St. Louis. This was wrestling's throne, an empire built on realism and tradition by its godfather, Sam Muchnick. But in the 1980s, a young, ambitious outsider decided that for his own empire to rise, this kingdom had to fall. This is the story of wrestling's last great kingdom and how Vince McMahon conquered it. In the wild, chaotic world of pro wrestling, a business filled with smoke, mirrors, and more than a few shady deals, one man earned an almost unbelievable title: the Honest Promoter. That man was Sam Muchnick. A Polish-born immigrant who grew up in St. Louis, Muchnick was a sports writer who looked at wrestling and didn't see a cheap carnival act. He saw a legitimate athletic contest. His whole philosophy was simple: treat the fans like they have a brain, and they'll give you their loyalty. In 1948, Muchnick helped form the National Wrestling Alliance, or NWA, which was basically a handshake agreement between regional promoters to bring some order to the industry. He was elected its president in 1950 and ended up serving for a staggering 25 years, defining the golden age of the territory system. Under this system, the country was carved up into territories, each run by a local promoter. Wrestlers would travel from region to region, working different crowds and building their reputations. And sitting at the very top of it all was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a traveling king who defended his title all over the country, whose presence was a guaranteed shot in the arm for any local promotion. And for most of that golden age, the heart of the NWA beat in St. Louis. Muchnick ran the St. Louis Wrestling Club, which everyone just called the St. Louis Office. His approach was old school and reality-based. He steered clear of the goofy gimmicks and over-the-top bloodbaths that were popular elsewhere. In St. Louis, wrestling was presented as a sport. Matches usually had decisive winners, the athletes were top tier, and the stories were told through believable, athletic action. Wrestlers from all over considered it the ultimate proving ground. If you could win over the tough, smart crowds at the Kiel Auditorium, you were probably destined for greatness. The NWA Missouri Heavyweight Championship was seen as a major stepping stone to the world title, held by guys who would become legends like Harley Race, Terry Funk, and Ric Flair. Muchnick didn't just build a promotion, he built a culture of prestige. In a business built on handshakes, his word was gold. He created wrestling's capital city, a kingdom built on credibility. Every kingdom needs a fortress, and in St. Louis, that fortress was a TV studio tucked inside a luxury hotel. Back in 1958, Sam Muchnick happened to be on a flight with Harold Koppler, the owner of the Chase Park Plaza Hotel and a brand new TV station, KPLR. They struck a deal that would change everything. They would film and broadcast wrestling matches right from the hotel's elegant Coruscant ballroom. On May 23, 1959, wrestling at the Chase hit the airwaves. It didn't look like any other wrestling show on TV. Forget smoky, rowdy arenas. This was intimate, almost classy. You had fans in suits and dresses sitting ringside, giving it the feel of a big-time championship boxing match. The show was a monster hit right out of the gate, becoming one of St. Louis's highest-rated programs with over 100,000 people tuning in every single week. For 24 years, it was can't-miss television. Wrestling at the Chase did more than just sell tickets for the big shows. It was the shield that protected the whole territory. It turned local wrestlers into household names and cemented St. Louis as a wrestling town. The show's insane popularity meant Muchnick's brand of wrestling was the only game in town. It reinforced his entire philosophy of sports-centric wrestling and created a generation of fans who demanded technical skill over cheap theatrics. The show was the engine of his empire and the cultural foundation of his kingdom. It sent a clear message. In St. Louis, wrestling was serious business. This identity, built over 2 decades of television, made the St. Louis territory feel untouchable. But no kingdom lasts forever. By the early 1980s, things were starting to change. Cable television was spreading, threatening to make the whole regional territory system a thing of the past. And in St. Louis, the man who built the empire from the ground up was getting ready to step down. On January 1st, 1982, Sam Muchnick promoted a massive farewell card at the St. Louis Arena. After decades in the business, the Godfather of St. Louis wrestling was retiring, an event so big the city named the day in his honor. But his exit created a power vacuum that would turn out to be fatal. Control of the St. Louis Wrestling Club shifted to a new group, including Kansas City promoter Bob Geigel and the legendary Harley Race, who took over booking. Cracks started to show almost immediately. Muchnick's longtime announcer and right-hand man, Larry Madison, felt the new management just didn't get the unique sports-first culture of St. Louis. He left to start his own competing promotion. All of a sudden, the unified St. Louis territory was at war with itself, with 2 promotions fighting over the same fans. This internal conflict left the kingdom critically weak, its walls crumbling from the inside. The timing couldn't have been worse, because a new kind of conqueror was on the horizon, and he didn't care one bit about tradition, gentlemen's agreements, or territory borders. In 1982, the same year Muchnick retired, a young promoter named Vince McMahon Jr. bought the World Wrestling Federation from his father. Vince Sr. had been a loyal NWA guy who respected the territory system. His son saw things differently. He viewed the territories as a bunch of outdated little kingdoms, just waiting to be bulldozed and rebuilt into a single, global empire. His vision wasn't wrestling. It was sports entertainment. He wanted over-the-top characters, cartoonish action, and total national domination. McMahon immediately began to break the unwritten rules of the territories, promoting WWF shows in his rivals' backyards. He used his growing national TV presence on the USA Network to beam his product into homes across the country. And, most importantly, he started raiding the other territories for their biggest stars, luring away guys like Hulk Hogan from the AWA and countless others from promotions big and small. St. Louis, already weakened by its civil war, was a prime target. McMahon's move was both brilliant and sacrilegious. The original Wrestling at the Chase had stopped production in September 1983. Shortly after, McMahon struck a deal with KPLR-TV, the station that had been the territory's shield for so long, to air WWF programming. The fortress was now opening its gates to the invaders. The WWF started running shows in St. Louis, often in the Kiel Auditorium, forcing the struggling St. Louis Wrestling Club into the bigger, more expensive St. Louis Arena, a move it just couldn't afford. The arrival of the WWF's biggest star sealed the deal. Hulk Hogan, the face of McMahon's new era, was a massive draw in St. Louis, just like he was everywhere else. The colorful comic book world of Hulkamania was the exact opposite of the grounded realism St. Louis fans were used to. But it was new, it was exciting, and it was everywhere. McMahon wasn't just invading St. Louis, he was changing its entire wrestling culture. The final years were a slow and painful death. The St. Louis Wrestling Club, under Bob Geigel's Central States banner, limped along, its audience shrinking with every WWF Super Show that rolled into town. The local scene, shattered by the internal conflict, couldn't put up a unified fight. The NWA's prestigious Missouri Heavyweight Championship was quietly retired in 1985, and by that point, the St. Louis office was effectively finished. What was left of the promotion was eventually sold to Jim Crockett Promotions, another NWA member who was trying, and failing, to build his own national company to fight McMahon. but it was far too little, too late. The St. Louis wrestling scene, as it had existed for 40 years, was over. A kingdom built on tradition and a sports-like presentation had been toppled by a new empire of television, marketing, and superheroes. The fall of St. Louis was a preview of what was happening all over the country. One by one, the territories fell, unable to compete with McMahon's national juggernaut. The era of regional wrestling, with its unique styles and local heroes, was gone. Something was gained, a global billion-dollar industry, but something was lost too. The idea that wrestling could be presented as a legitimate sport where wins and losses mattered largely vanished. St. Louis was one of the last great bastions of that philosophy. The throne was now empty, and the man who conquered it would reshape the entire wrestling world in his own image. The story of Sam Muchnick's St. Louis is really the story of an era's end. It's a reminder of a time when the wrestling world was a map of different kingdoms, each with its own soul. If you enjoyed this look back at wrestling history, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the Squared Circle. And let us know in the comments, what was your favorite wrestling territory? We'll see you next time.